Um, we're very encouraged that the draft outcome declaration for the high-level meeting that will take place in a couple of days recognizes the need to include learners with disabilities in COVID-19 response and recovery. And certainly that's consistent with the recommendations of the Global Education Monitoring Report, the video that we just saw, which recognizes that diversity is not a problem, but it's an opportunity in education. We are concerned, however, that the draft outcome declaration talks about transformation, but in fact, what we see is that many attempts to build back better are incremental and that they won't fundamentally address the exclusion of learners with disabilities. We think that we shouldn't be thinking only of building back better. We need to think about building back different. So what needs to be done? First of all, a key point of consensus of the GLAD members is that we need to adopt what's been called a twin track approach. And that means addressing systemic issues to promote full inclusion of all learners, while at the same time investing in accommodations and individual supports that are required for learners with disabilities. That's very different from creating silos or separate programs for different marginalized groups, which really has been the pattern too often in the past, where funding has been available for specific programs for specific groups of marginalized learners, rather than addressing the systemic issues of the system as a whole. Another concern we have is that the challenge is not just to train teachers, but to support teachers, to support them with resources, with expertise, with management practices, such as problem-solving skills. And I think the examples that we just heard from Italy are exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about, where there is a systemic approach to making sure that teachers are supported, because no matter how much training is offered, teachers are not going to be ready to handle every single issue that arises in their class, and they need to be able to draw on support. We're also concerned that we need to look at different forms of pedagogy. And the one that we're promoting in particular is universal design for learning, which enables teachers to teach all learners and improves the quality of education for all. Related to that is our concern that we need to be wary of unintended consequences of some actions, and that some approaches to remediation can in fact increase inequality by fostering segregation of learners with disabilities. And one caution that I will draw your attention to is the concept of teaching at the right level that was mentioned by the UK. And our concern is that often teaching at the right level can lead to grouping learners with disabilities by themselves, rather than taking an approach of universal design for learning, which is what we're very much promoting. Another point that we think is important is that measurement and data collection is certainly important, and disaggregated data is needed, but we need to make sure that investments are not made in ways that will produce the right numbers. And we need to be sure that we're focusing on counting the impact on the most marginalized, where progress may be slow. And so, for example, we heard from the minister from Pakistan about the numbers of students who are still out of school. We think that we need to be focusing our data collection on those students. Why are they out of school? And making sure that those numbers decrease and that more and more students get back to school. We also are concerned about what some researchers in Nepal have referred to as an urban mindset. And certainly the focus on distance learning now is really a problem in the poorest communities, the rural communities, where access to internet and to equipment is not available. We think it's important to develop a common vision among key actors, and that's a strong message from the Global Education Monitoring Report, that inclusion is not for one group. Portugal has shown an excellent example of this because I think their initial efforts at inclusion started by focusing on learners with disabilities, but they've now transformed their system to make sure that it's inclusive of all learners. In Spain right now, there's a new social media campaign. In Spanish, it's called Educación Inclusiva, Quierla es creerla. And that means inclusive education, to want it is to create it. And that is being supported by a range of civil society actors, by families, by educational professionals and academics. And it's a way of putting a focus on inclusion as guiding all activities. Another example comes from Sierra Leone, where they've announced a policy of radical inclusion. It was first applied to pregnant girls and young mothers who were being excluded from school, but it seems to be an apt slogan for ensuring that we're talking about including all, radical inclusion. And finally, while educators play key roles, we can't forget parents, who are the most important persons in the lives of children with disabilities. Parents should be mobilized, they should be supported to assist in the lives of their children, both during and after the pandemic, because investing in families will lead to lifelong benefits in the lives of their children. So in conclusion, we can't talk about including learners with disabilities without talking about fully inclusive systems. Inclusive education requires a profound cultural shift at early education, primary, secondary, and post-secondary levels. It means having one system of education for all learners, no longer separate departments of special education. It means providing supports that are inclusive of learners with disabilities. And by committing ourselves to include learners with disabilities, we can ensure improved quality of education for all. Thank you.